Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. Last month, I created this moon goddess magical girl illustration for my March Patreon rewards, and I did the entire process breaking down on how I painted it. And so for this month's Patreon reward for the month of April, I am going to be creating the sun goddess illustration in the same magical girl aesthetic to be the pair or companion to our moon magical girl. And so since the process is essentially the same as the previous illustration and I already have a video on it, I thought that I would do one of my long form real-time process videos with the Q&A voiceover. So over on the YouTube community tab, Patreon, and on Instagram stories, I asked you guys to submit your questions. And yeah, essentially this will be a podcast style voiceover with the painting process as the visuals. And if you haven't seen these videos before, basically I kind of break up the questions. First half, I talk about art and career, and then in the middle, I kind of talk about life and personal things or just like silly questions, and then I kind of leave the sort of fandom type questions for the end. So jumping straight into it, our first question here is, have you ever tried oil pastels? Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with oil pastels. I have a set that I bought many years ago when I worked at an art supply store, and I think I've used them a total of 2 times. One of them being a Patreon YouTube video, actually. I would say the one tip maybe that I would provide is typically when you're using pastels in general, you do want to use a paper that has a bit of a toothy or slightly textured surface because the pastels need some kind of grit to grab onto. How long did it take for you to have an understanding in gouache? How did you practice painting when you first started? I can't put a specific timeline on when I had an understanding in gouache because it just doesn't, it's not that formulaic in my opinion. When I was initially introduced to gouache, I learned it from college and it was being presented to me in a totally different way. Basically, from my understanding, gouache was initially something that designers would use before computers. They were being used really in a graphic, flat way to create posters and advertisements and things like that. So when I was using gouache, I was using it in, a very flat graphic way. And now the style that I use gouache for the most part, I do a lot of shading and rendering, and I'm being a little bit more painterly about it. And that's something that I did self-taught. When I was in school, that was not the way that gouache was being taught to me and the way that it was supposed to be used. So you just have to try it. You just have to experiment and go for it, because I think that there isn't one specific right way to do something, especially when it comes to painting and illustration. And when it comes to practicing, I recommend using reference photos to do studies, because that way you are focusing on maneuvering and figuring out the medium, and you're not having to use all that brain power to construct an illustration. So just focus on something simple when you're starting out, whatever kind of object or thing you find approachable, and then work your way up to portraits or, the thing that you're most interested in, because that's how you learn, is just through practice and trial and error. What medium has been your most challenging to use, and what have you learned from conquering it? So I would say that I actually don't feel that I have conquered anything. And I think that is why I feel so passionately about the importance of experimenting and trial and error and just doing the thing, because every single time I make any illustration with any medium, I'm constantly troubleshooting, and there's always something that doesn't go the way that I think it will, and I'm always going through a existential crisis when I'm making something. It's very, very rare for me to go through an illustration and be like, wow, that was so easy. But I do think that the most challenging in terms of what I typically use is watercolors. They are unpredictable, and even though I have a very strong love-hate relationship with them, the love outweighs the hate, and the results can be so gratifying and beautiful if they work out the way that I want them to. So yeah, but if I were to say like any medium that I've ever tried, oil painting, even though I only tried it once in high school, I did find that to be quite challenging, but I haven't used them since, and that was a very long time ago. But before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. As you might know, Squarespace is a great platform that is so versatile for many different applications as a creative. One of those things is having an online store. Here I have a secret shop that allows all of my patrons to access the previous Patreon print and sticker rewards, so you can get all of the Zodiac ones that you missed out on. And a great feature is that you can actually connect your Square Reader to your shop so that you can keep track of your inventory if you do in-person events as well, which makes everything so streamlined. So if you're interested in checking out Squarespace, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Did you ever try to do abstract painting, and how did it turn out? I have not intentionally made an abstract painting in any recent years that I can recall. Of course, I'm sure when I was younger, I probably did, but I would say that it is something that I'm thinking about doing more often purely for fun. Not something that I would necessarily use for a YouTube video or content or anything like that, but I do think that I need to spend less time just scrolling on social media or whatever. And I do think that there is something to be said about just creating something for the joy of doing it. I was kind of inspired by my friend who is not an artist, but she recently has taken up the hobby of coloring books. And she just seemed so joyous when she was talking about it with me, and that she was spending hours just pouring into these coloring books, and that it was super fun for her, and it was just a fun outlet. And it's purely just for the entertainment and joy of doing the thing. It's not meant for social media. It has nothing to do with her job. It's purely an activity for fun. And it really made me realize that I spend so much of my free time just scrolling on social media platforms. And I really do think that when you create for a living, you kind of lose your hobby. That used to, painting and drawing used to be my hobby, but now I'm what is my hobby? And so I think that painting and drawing patterns or purely abstract things could be a fun outlet that would be a hobby, but has, isn't something that feels I have to capitalize on for content or work. So we'll see. I haven't actually done anything yet, but it's something that I've been thinking about. When you're drawing, do you listen to music that relates to the idea? If the drawing is calm, the music is also calm. This is sort of perfect timing because recently there was an Instagram story going around that people were sharing their art versus the music that they listen to. And I was noticing a lot of people doing this trend. They would be posting the music that they listen to that fit the vibe of their illustrations. And that totally makes sense. But for me, admittedly, the music that I'm in the mood for while I'm painting, I think that it's a completely separate thing from the mood of the illustration versus the mood that I'm in for the music I want to listen to. So to illustrate that, I posted a compilation of my illustrations, of course, a lot of them being quite fun and cutesy and colorful. The music that I chose was Gorilla by ATEEZ, and the segment of the song that I picked for the story especially was the part where they're screaming. So it's very aggressive and intense, which does not generally suit the vibe of my illustrations. And that's honestly what happens a lot of the times. I'll be listening to Linkin Park one day, or even in the same day, and then I'll be listening to the High School Musical 2 soundtrack like immediately after. I just listen to whatever. It has nothing to do with the illustration. Have you considered making paintings based on songs? I feel like I used to do this more when I was in high school. I would create an illustration with a song in mind, and then I would cringily like put the lyrics on the illustration or whatever. But I don't think I necessarily do that as much anymore. But I would say that sometimes when I post my illustrations on Instagram, because Instagram now has that feature where you can have music attached to it. So I will try to find a song that fits the vibe of the illustration for that purpose, but it's not always the case when I think of the song first and then I make an illustration based on that specifically. But I do love that idea. How do you get over the fear of messing up a mixed media painting? The funny thing is, I feel like the result of me doing so many mixed media illustrations is because I'm trying to fix a messed up painting. And what I mean by that is, so for example, the illustration that you're watching right now, I wanted this illustration to be primarily watercolors, and that ended up being the case for last month's illustration. And so that was my intention for this illustration as well. But as you'll see later on in the illustration process, I end up covering a lot of her hair with acrylic gouache. And that is purely because I was unhappy with how dark I went with it with watercolors and the shade and like the hue that I went with. And I wasn't able to backtrack or make it lighter or change the color really with watercolors. And so I was like, I guess I need to introduce some acrylic gouache into the mix to fix it. I think that the beauty of mixed media is that you get to utilize all the different things, the strengths of each medium in order to complement something that the other medium can't do. AKA with watercolors, it's pretty hard to lighten an area, but with acrylic gouache, you can totally do that, no problem. What is your favorite art technique you discovered by accident? For sure, I think it would be the way that I shade and create gradients using acrylic gouache, because like I mentioned earlier, when I was initially being taught how to use gouache, I was told to use it super flat, and the shading and rendering is something that I developed on my own. And with acrylic gouache specifically, and I've talked about this process technique in my videos lots of times, because it dries down permanent, I'm able to do a lot of like watery glazes and a lot of buffing and like scrubbing essentially with the paintbrush and paints on top that I have to be much more careful about when I'm using regular gouache or watercolors, because the layer underneath can be disturbed. Is there a type of environment/background you like to get better at drawing? Example, urban, floral, aquatic, etc. I really have a hard time with backgrounds, and I would say that urban ones are especially the hardest. Anything that's like really structured or man-made, because buildings or like interiors of rooms, things like that, I find it's easier to spot when it's done incorrectly. Whereas I think things that are organic, like a forest or mountains, I find that it's not as obvious if something is off. So yeah, I would say urban backgrounds, man-made things, environments would be something that I would love to get better at, but it'll be a long time, I think. Do you think you will ever do a full illustration digitally? I actually have in the past. I don't really do it as much anymore these days, but never say never. I actually have been toying with the idea of doing more digital illustrations, particularly when it comes to K-pop fan art, just because trying to capture a real person's likeness is really challenging. And I do think that there is so much more flexibility in being able to tinker around with something digitally. So that's probably where it's gonna end up happening. Learning to stylize instead of drawing what you see when you're doing studies. I find I get trapped in replicating and not putting in my own style. Which I'm not sure if I even have one. This is something that like partially is just going to happen I find that with art style, it's sort of intuitive and you don't even realize it's happening. So to kind of go back to the K-pop thing, I did a series of 80s portraits last year, and I did find that I was leaning much more realistic than my typical illustrations because I was zoning in on trying to capture the likeness of a real person. And so they do read more realistic than my typical illustrations, but I still have tons of people commenting on how, oh, it's clearly still stylized. There's still something stylized about it, but I can still recognize the member. Like, I didn't consciously think about how am I going to stylize this person. And that's where your art style just naturally is happening. You don't realize it, but it is. But if you're like trying to be really intentional about stylizing something, especially, if you're doing studies, is to pick something to exaggerate. So for example, you can exaggerate the line art, or you can make it more angular. Or when it comes to portraits, you can exaggerate a feature. So maybe you make the eyes a little bit bigger, or you make the nose a little bit smaller or simpler, or, things like that. There's like a lot of different avenues that you can go into. And so that's kind of, I guess, how I would go about trying to pick a style, I guess, is try all these different exaggerations, and then you'll eventually see what you tend to gravitate towards or what you prefer. Hi, Tina. You deeply inspire me in ways I can't truly put to words. After discovering your content, it has given me a sense of renewed energy. My question to you is, how have your dreams changed as you've grown, and what keeps you going? First of all, thank you so much. And I want to say this to anyone who's ever left me a comment about how my work has inspired you in some way, shape, or form. It is truly amazing. I would say that to answer your actual question, I ended up landing where I always wanted to be, I think. So when I was in high school, initially, I had a brief moment of delusion thinking I wanted to be an animator because I was so obsessed with anime. But I quickly realized that animation did not make sense for me because I do not have the patience and work ethic to be an animator. And then I realized that I really just wanted to make art, like illustrations. But then when I went to actual college, I went to school for graphic design because I thought that was the more practical choice. And I was thinking about, how my mom would feel about it and job security and all those things. But here I am. After all these years, I ended up actually being an illustrator. So I'm very grateful for that. In your past videos, you mentioned that you had a friend that recommended you should broaden your horizons and avoid just drawing anime. Personally, I'm inspired by cartoons and want to create a business creating cartoony art. However, on social media, semi-realistic / highly rendered paintings perform much better compared to cartoons. In a business sense, should I stick to my artistic guns or pivot to make something that appeals to a larger audience? No matter what art style it is that you want to pursue, absolutely stick to it. So in your case, for sure, stick to the cartoony art style that you are interested in, because you will find your audience, you will find your niche, you will find the people that want to work with you based on something that you are passionate about. I think that, people can tell when the thing that you made is something that you're really, really into, as opposed to doing something purely because it's what you assume is going to appeal to a larger audience. Something that is important to note is just because a certain style or a certain post or a certain theme, whatever it is, technically performs really well on social media, that doesn't necessarily translate to jobs or shop sales or, something that's more tangible. What I would recommend to you is to follow other artists who are making work that's sort of within the realm of what you are interested in. And then you can learn from them and see what works for them. And you're also just surrounding yourself in a community that you are more interested in. And personally, I think that a super cartoony, stylized, simple style is extremely versatile. When you look at animation or comics or merchandise, these are things that are extremely successful and are very viable things for people. And at the end of the day, I think art should be a reflection of your artistic vision and expression. It shouldn't be a thing that you do purely to reach a wide audience. Have you ever thought about painting murals? I think painting a mural sounds extremely daunting, and honestly, I don't think I'm built for it. One, I am extremely impatient, so I do think that's a project that would take a very long time. Two, I'm kind of scared of heights, so that would be a no-go. Three, the idea of painting in public sounds like a absolute nightmare. Public in a way where you are being very, very seen. So I think that when you're painting a mural, you have to accept that random strangers are going to talk to you. And sometimes I'm sure it's nice interactions, but there's definitely going to be situations where people are not nice or annoying, and I absolutely could not handle that. How do you deal with creative burnout when art is your career? My biggest fear is that after school, when I get a creative career, I will fall out of love. Unfortunately, I am struggling with that. I actually made a YouTube video at the beginning of this year talking about my art goals, and one of them literally was to fall back in love with art. So unfortunately, yes, this is something that you are going to potentially deal with, and I'm sure many full-time artists can agree that when your hobby and your passion project becomes your job, it does change your relationship with it, unfortunately. And so I'm personally on that journey of trying to figure out, how do I capture the love that I used to have for it? And I think one of the things is to sort of backtrack and remind yourself, like, what was it that sparked that joy? And for me, one of those things was fan art. That's kind of what catapulted my excessive drawing and creating, was making fan art. And so that's something that I still really enjoy doing, and I continue to tap into, and it does bring me a lot of joy to create work for pieces of media that I really, really love. And another thing is finding other creative outlets. And I think one of them for me has been clothes and makeup and styling. That is, to me, another creative outlet that I've been really enjoying, that's separate from my work. What's your take on the recent topic regarding AI quote-unquote art and its implications toward art in general? I don't think that anything that I can say will be new information in terms of what has been discussed about AI art, but I do want to make my stance very clear that I am absolutely against AI art. And I do love that the person who asked this question did put art in quotations, because I absolutely agree that AI generated images is not real art. To me, art is supposed to be a form of expression from a person. And AI generated images is just regurgitating stolen artwork from real people and just mishmashing them together. When a person creates art, whether it be an illustration, a film, music, these are all things that are being created from a person's lived experiences, and they're telling a story. They're infusing a piece of themselves into this piece of artwork. And I think that it's very dystopian to think that these, power hungry, greedy corporations want to replace people that create these things for AI instead. And there's definitely going to be people out there who's like, oh, it's really not that serious, but it's going to spiral really quickly because these corporations are so greedy and they think, oh, why would I hire a real person to do the concept work or to write the lyrics or to write the script or whatever for this thing, because I will just get AI to do it instead. And as a result, we are going to end up with something so hollow and shallow. And I am extremely grateful that people still continue to appreciate traditional art, because this is something that cannot be mistaken for AI generated art, in my opinion. You can see me physically painting something and I have a physical product of that. So I really feel for digital artists, because now they're just constantly having to defend themselves and prove that what they make is not AI generated. A quote that has been going around from people trying to defend AI art that has rubbed me the wrong way is, oh, AI now makes art accessible. And to me, that just reads as so lazy and selfish, because they just want that instant gratification and a quote unquote shortcut. They don't want to actually put in the real work that is required to make art. But I feel so passionately about the fact that art truly is meant to be a labor of love, because creating art is also about the process and the journey, the climb, to quote Miley Cyrus. It's not just about the final result. I'd love to know more about your time working at the art supply store in Toronto. Did you learn anything from that job? Did it fuel wanting more art supplies? How's the Toronto artist scene in general? So I initially had a clothing retail job for like 6 months or so, absolutely hated it, and then applied to an art supply store. And I actually had worked at an art supply store part-time during my years in college as well, but I had to quit because I moved. And so I was like, you know what, we need to go back to that, because I much preferred working at an art supply store. And so I worked at this art supply store since 2013 all the way until 2020, so quite a long time. And there was a lot of things that I learned from that job, actually. One of them being, it definitely did fuel me to buy a lot of art supplies, but in the end, I'm glad that it did, because it allowed me to explore so many different mediums, and some of them that, like I mentioned earlier with acrylic gouache especially, it's not something that I would have picked up otherwise, I don't think. The thing about working at an art supply store was we were constantly receiving new products, we were receiving new brands, and so I was never pressured or obligated to buy any of this stuff, but I did have like a 30 or 40% discount, which was amazing. So it definitely encouraged us to buy things. And when I was working there, I would get questions from customers about art supplies, and sometimes it would be about a supply that I wasn't necessarily super familiar with, but it did sort of force me to do some research on those materials so that I was better at providing advice for these people. And then on top of that, pretty much all of my coworkers were also artists. So not only was I just surrounded by actual art supplies, but then I was also surrounded by artists themselves. And we built like such an amazing friendship and community. And I was just so grateful to be able to be around creative people and like make friends outside of my school environment, since, I had moved to Toronto and moved away from all of my college friends. And then, of course, I would obviously come into contact with a lot of different artists who were customers from the store, and you just get to know about their stories and the art that they made. And I also feel like working retail and customer service in general, you are provided so much life experience in good ways and in bad ways. It really develops your people skills and how to handle sometimes unpleasant situations. I do think that having been in a customer service retail environment for so long, I do think that there's elements about it that had prepared me for YouTube, such as being able to articulate my art process or talk about art supplies and provide advice about those kinds of things. And I do think that the years of customer service has also lended itself really well for me when it comes to live streams and also selling at in-person artist alleys. I know that I have friends who definitely lean much more introverted, who find that live streams and artist alleys so draining. And don't get me wrong, they definitely are. But I do think that having done, 8 hours of a retail job over and over and over for many years, it has like built a stamina in me to be able to be in that kind of environment, to sell and talk to people and just like be on in that like customer servicey mode for very, very long hours. And when it comes to the Toronto art scene in general, it kind of depends on like what art scene you mean, because when it comes to like the fine art or traditional art scene, like for example, my friend who I used to work with at the art supply store, she's an oil painter, and she found that that kind of art scene, like the gallery art scene, really, really challenging to kind of break into. But when it comes to like, you know, artist alleys or, you know, quote unquote lowbrow art spaces like markets and conventions and things like that, I do think that Toronto does have a lot of things to offer in that regard. So for example, yesterday, I literally did a K-pop and anime convention. That's probably not something that a lot of people come across in their own cities. And another example is my friend is doing a convention that's specific for queer artist. And again, that's something that I think is really great about Toronto, is I do think that there is a lot of markets catered to all these different communities. And while we're on that topic, the next question is best and worst interaction you've had at artist alleys. I've had a lot of really great interactions at artist alleys, so it's hard to narrow it down to a specific one, but I would say some highlights are when someone gives me fan art. That to me is just the absolute most generous thing that anyone could do. I also find that whenever I have like a repeating customer who I've seen for many, many years come back to my table and they share stories with me about, you know, having followed my trajectory for a long time, I feel like I could gush for hours about all the lovely interactions I've had at conventions. But of course, with the good, there's always going to be some bad. I think the worst interactions I've had always end up being men, unfortunately, who just say really misogynistic or out-of-pocket things. Thankfully, those don't happen very often, and I think that my artist alley table / booth has gotten so aggressively girly that the type of guy who would say anything misogynistic is not even going to come near my table anymore. So that has been a really great blessing as to leaning into all of the pink, essentially. If you could give your 15-year-old self some advice, what would it be? I would tell her not to be so hard on herself. I was a extremely self-conscious teenager. I had an extremely low self-esteem and I really was not having a good time. And I'd also tell her that while yes, you are feeling extremely alienated for being quote unquote weird and uncool because of the things that you like, eventually that will lead you to an amazing group of friends and experiences, and also getting to be a full-time artist, which is absolutely incredible. What advice would your 15-year-old self give you in your current age? This is a really interesting one because I don't really know what that girl would say to me now, just because I was so insecure, and I think she would just be in awe of who I am now, which I think is a really nice thing to be reminded of, because I do think that I am still hard on myself nowadays, but I think that just reflecting on who I was back then just makes me proud of where I'm at now. So maybe that is the piece of advice that 15-year-old self would give me, is to wait, am I just giving myself the same advice both ways? Yeah, I think I am. Can you tell I didn't write a script? I guess the moral of the story is I just need to be kinder to myself and give myself more credit no matter what age I am. Have people ever recognized you randomly on the street? Not on the street, but I have been recognized at concerts. Particularly, I was recognized at the 17 concert, the 1975 concert, and the 80s concert. And all of the interactions have been absolutely lovely. Basically what ends up happening is, someone does like a double, triple take of me and then like very sheepishly will be like, hey, I know this is kind of weird, but like, imawonder, are you an artist on YouTube? Or did I see you at Fan Expo? Like that's kind of essentially how it goes. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. And then it'll be them just telling me, oh, I love your work, or I've bought something from you or whatever. And then they go on their way basically. And it's so sweet. So yeah, if you ever see me out in the wild, feel free to say hi. It'll probably make my day. What POV do you usually dream from? I think this is such a fascinating question because I didn't really even realize that people would dream in a different POV other than your own. So for me, I actually don't really remember my dreams that often. Like it's more common for me to just go to sleep, black darkness, and then wake up with no recollection of anything. But the very few times that I do dream about anything, it's always just from my own point of view, and it's oftentimes some kind of like mundane anxiety dream. What makes you passionate about fashion? What's your favorite part about it? To me, I view fashion in the way that I view painting and illustration, essentially. To me, fashion is art, and it's another form of creative expression from the designer or the person who's wearing it if they styled it in a very specific way. Fashion is wearable art, essentially, and it's something that you're able to express your creativity with in something that you get to wear on your body, which is so cool in my opinion. What's your favorite pattern or patterns in clothing? I have always been a big lover of plaid and tartan. I just think that there is something so timeless about it and so versatile. You can go very sweet with it. You can go preppy, you can go punk, and there's so many different color variations. And it's something that, in my opinion, will never go out of style. What are your top 5 favorite statement pieces in your closet? This is such a fun but challenging question because I have so many amazing statement pieces in my closet, and I do feel like my answer is always going to be changing. But as of right now, the first things that come to mind is this vintage maxi black lace skirt that I styled in my recent Japan packing video. It's both gothic and romantic and kind of vampire-esque. So those are all the things that I love in a piece. The second piece is this vintage burgundy leather trench coat that I bought secondhand. It is so badass. Like, I feel like I am Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, I just feel incredibly cool in it. Third is this Ragged Priest midi skirt that I got on sale. Super long crisscrossed grommet belt is such a cherry on top. Fourth piece is this really cool silver ring that I got secondhand. I just think it's so beautiful, and I've been really into like big chunky silver jewelry. And then the last one is this red plaid skinny scarf that I got recently and also styled in that Japan packing video. I just love red plaid, and I think this is such a fun way to incorporate that into an outfit. How would you describe your makeup style, and will you make more fashion videos? For my makeup style, I feel like it's sort of a mishmash of a lot of different Asian beauty trends. I just come across a lot of different creators who are doing Korean or Japanese or Chinese or Thai style makeup, and then I just sort of pluck different things that I see that I like and try it on myself and see if it works. I think one of the key elements to my makeup that I started doing the past few years that I absolutely love, which is a product of Asian makeup trends, is the really, really high blush placement and also very like prominent looking blush. This is something that I think really suits my face shape and just like the general style that I like to present myself in. For those of you who don't know, the Pack for Japan video that I did last month, I did a huge like styling portion with my wardrobe, and I was so nervous about it, but I had so much fun making it, and I am so encouraged and feel so giddy about the fact that you are asking for more fashion videos and I'm getting fashion related questions in this Q&A. So I think I probably will. I'm not really sure at what capacity that will be, but again, I do think that it's a really fun creative outlet for me. And if you guys are interested in it, please let me know so that I feel more confident in pursuing that for future videos. Why do you love thrifting / what excites you about it? Will you be thrifting in Japan? And if yes, take some snaps / document it. Not only do I feel great about giving a second life to an item that has been discarded by somebody else, you know, someone's trash is someone else's treasure, but also I think that when you're thrifting, you really don't know what you're going to find or what kind of gems you might come across. And I find it particularly thrilling when you come across a really unique vintage piece that just is made better, has, you know, a more unique silhouette or cut, and it could be from a brand that doesn't exist anymore. And I just think that is so exciting, and it ends up creating a much more interesting wardrobe if you have a mix of things from different decades and from brands that might not be in production anymore. That being said, yes, I will be trying to thrift in Japan. I have a bunch of places bookmarked. I will for sure be documenting as much as I can. I'm going to be making a whole bunch of vlogs about it, and follow me on Instagram if you want to feel, you know, the real-time moments, because I'm definitely going to be trying to post to my stories throughout the trip. But yeah, I don't know what I'm going to find. Obviously, the sizing is something I have to be very aware of as well, just like manage my expectations, but you never know. That being said, though, someone asks, are you only a clothes thrifter or are you also a weird / obscure trinket girly? And to that I say, correct. I am also into weird / obscure trinkets as well. I am definitely going to be looking out for accessories and trinkets in my Japan thrifting adventures. Who are your fashion inspirations? I definitely take inspiration from a lot of places, much like I do with my artwork, but I would say that something that comes to mind definitely in my formative years was I absolutely adored the Nana manga. The fashion in that series is amazing, and that's definitely where my fixation of leather jackets, red plaid, Vivienne Westwood, and, you know, like kind of a duality, if you will, you know, like the punk kind of edgy side, but also the soft shoujo girl side kind of came from, I think. And I also have always loved Misa's outfits and style from Death Note. She is an icon. And when it comes to more recent inspirations, I definitely have a Pinterest board that I pin to for inspo. And then I also take a lot of inspiration from K-pop. And if we want to get really nitty gritty, I also really love two particular creators here on YouTube that I watch a lot of. Both of them have really fun styles that I admire a lot, and I enjoy their videos quite a lot. So I recommend checking them out if this is a subject that you're into. Is there anything new that you didn't do on your last Japan trip that you're looking forward to? There are so many things, which is exactly why I'm going a second time in the first place, because there's just so many things that I want to do. And one of the things being the Ghibli Park. Last time I went to the Ghibli Museum. I am going to be going to Universal Studios. I'm going to be going to Tokyo Disneyland. Last time we did Disney Sea. And I'm going to be able to do a lot more shopping and thrifting like I mentioned earlier. We're going to be going to Pearl Land, which is like the Hello Kitty Sanrio amusement park. And yeah, just taking in more sights, exploring more neighborhoods, eating more food, like everything. I'm so excited. Other than Korea and Japan, what other countries would you like to see? I would really love to go to Europe. I have never been. I don't really know exactly where I would go specifically yet, which is probably why I haven't been yet. But from my understanding, it has a lot of amazing architecture and art and history. So that's something that I would love to experience, and it would be a lot different from the places that I've already traveled to. Would you try hosting another Trova trip in the future? So for those of you who don't know, last year I had teamed up with Trova Trip to try and have like a group retreat essentially. Unfortunately, it did not pan out. And admittedly, I was sort of relieved in the end about it because promoting it was so stressful and it gave me so much imposter syndrome and anxiety and insecurities, and it didn't work out. So I did initially feel like kind of humiliated, to be honest, because I was promoting the heck out of it and then it didn't happen. But never say never. I do love traveling and I do think that it could be a really cool thing to do. But unfortunately, I am a little bit traumatized by the whole experience, so I don't see it happening anytime in the future. I have 2 questions here that are essentially the same thing. So one was something about your love life, and then the other one was any new cringe dating stories. The ones that you've had before were so entertaining. This is so hysterical to me that I got 2 questions about this because I just think that's so funny. But unfortunately, I do not have anything new to share because I have actively been avoiding dating. And the reason for that is because I realized that all the time that I'd spent on these dates, I would have had a much better time by myself or with my friends. And so I realized I don't need these men. I am plenty fulfilled by the friendships and the community that I've built for myself. My friends and I plan really cute dates and activities for ourselves, and it's always a joint effort. And they also show up for me, whether it be for my birthday or when I need help. We go on trips together, and it's a relationship that's built on a mutual level of investment and energy and joy. And that is not the experience that I've had with the majority of the men that I've dated. What are some pieces of media that we might be surprised that you listen to / watch, etc.? I really did think about this, and honestly, I've come to the realization that I am such an open book and I am not mysterious whatsoever. And whenever I'm really into something, I'm never normal about it. So I'm like making fan art, I'm being obnoxious and telling everyone about it. So I really don't think that there's anything that I could tell you guys that I'm into that would surprise you, to be honest. Honestly, the only thing that I can think of that might surprise a couple of you is I have a deep love for Batman animated projects. Particularly, I loved the animated Batman series from the 90s, and I had a big love for Batman Beyond. I've actually been really wanting to rewatch Batman Beyond because it's been ages, and I just remember thinking that it was so cool. And I particularly just love the Bruce Timm character designs. I think that his way of simplification and like this kind of approach to shape language is so cool and dynamic. Any new fandoms you're in but we don't know about? I am not fully in the fandom just yet, but because I'm never normal about anything, I'm sure that's inevitable that I will be knee deep into this thing later. But I have started listening to Plave, which is a virtual K-pop boy group. Basically, it is real people who sing and dance, but they like wear mocap suits, and then they have like a persona that kind of has like a anime manhwa looking kind of vibe, essentially like a VTuber, I guess. And yeah, they were so popular in Korea. They were everywhere. And I just like, I did not understand it. I was like, what? I don't get what is going on here. And then I just kept getting recommended their music later on. And I was like, wait, I'm kind of into it. I'm kind of into the music. And then, yeah, now I know some of their names. I've watched their music videos. And yeah, sure enough, give it a few months to marinate and I'll probably be very knowledgeable, I'm sure. It's only a matter of time. Bit of a silly question, but do you play Love and Deep Space? For those of you who don't know, Love and Deep Space is, I think, a dating game, I guess. I don't actually know for sure, but essentially I know about this through osmosis because I feel like my world is just constantly feeding me Love and Deep Space. I did that K-pop and anime convention, and there was a whole section dedicated to a photo shoot where you could take photos with people cosplaying as the characters, as well as life-sized cardboard cutouts. I do believe that there was a number of people dressed up as characters from them. When I did my, ranking fictional characters live stream a few months ago, Silas from Love in Deep Space was nominated, and I did draw him. So yeah, I've never played, but I seem to know a lot about it, which is very funny. But yeah, I get it. They are very handsome. It's very valid. If you had the power to change anything in a series, what would be the series you think deserves it the most? I don't know about deserves it the most necessarily, but for my own selfish personal reasons, I think that Jujutsu Kaisen deserves more filler. And what I mean by that is the pacing of it is so fast that we don't get enough time to really get to know the characters in just their everyday lives. And to me, that was sort of the beauty of older series, was that when you get these kind of more filler or like mundane episodes, like going to the beach or going to school or just hanging out with each other, you really get invested and you get really attached to these characters, and they just become, like fully fleshed beings that feel real to you. And you get really into the dynamics that they have with each other, and you create like a bond with these characters. And then it carries so much more weight when you get to the plot of the story and something bad happens to someone, or you celebrate their triumphs because you've seen them just like as normal people as well as like these fantastical, powerful beings. And I think that with the older series like Naruto or Bleach, yes, the fillers were too long. Like we were doing too many filler arcs. But I do think that the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction, where the pacing is now too fast, where they introduce a character and then they die immediately and we're supposed to care. I would say that there are a number of cases where there are characters that you don't sit with as long, and yes, it still feels, gut-wrenching when something bad happens to them, but it would be even more significant if we got to spend more time with them. And I think that I feel especially this case when it comes to Gojo and Geto's like backstory. Like, I would have absolutely eaten up an entire season or multiple seasons of their high school days. And I think that they deserved more. We deserved more time with them. And yeah, so that's kind of my selfish thing that I would change. And I guess another selfish thing would be, I want another season of Skate the Infinity. We only have one season, and then they just dropped a single OVA episode, and I need more. Particularly, I want more of Joe and Cherry high school days. I think there's a theme here, but in any case, that's my own selfish personal thing that I would want. Have you seen Sakamoto Days or any other recent anime? I have not watched Sakamoto Days yet. Do let me know if you think it's worth me checking out. But I would say the most recent anime that I've seen is probably Dandadan. And in this sphere of content, I don't even know if that's considered new anymore, but I think that's the most recent one I can think of. And I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was so much fun, and I definitely look forward to the next season. What's a show or thing your friends do that you refuse to do/watch? I wouldn't say necessarily refuse, but it's just not something that appeals to me. But I do feel like a lot of my friends and like my circle really enjoy reality TV shows, whether it be, Love is Blind or Love Island, or, like those kinds of shows. What's another one? Singles Inferno. A lot of them, being dating kind of related shows. I don't know. I think a big part of it is I get really severe secondhand embarrassment. And I feel like those types of shows warrant a lot of secondhand embarrassment, especially because it's reality TV. versus a scripted TV show where something embarrassing happens to a character. I feel like I can still feel secondhand embarrassment, but it's like not as bad because it's scripted. And yeah, those kinds of shows just don't really appeal to me. I would say the only reality TV show that I watch in recent years is RuPaul's Drag Race, and I feel like that's its own category altogether because it's a competition show rather than something like Singles Inferno, which is just its own entirely different thing. But yeah, I feel like whenever those types of shows comes up, it's just like completely over my head when people are talking about the newest episode of Selling Sunset or something. And I totally understand why people enjoy these kinds of shows. I think it's one of those, you know, fast food type TV shows where you just like want to turn your brain off and just see the messiness of it all. And I guess it's sort of like a social experiment to a degree, like Love is Blind. And what was the other one? The Circle. Like, it just brings out a certain side of people when you're kind of boxing them up in these very specific parameters. But yeah, I was at my friend's place and we were in a big group hangout and we had watched a couple of clips or like segments of the newest season of Singles Inferno, and they were wrestling each other. It was insane. I was like, what is happening right now? But I will say, like, I used to watch shows like that. Like, I was definitely a product of those like early to mid 2000s MTV shows like The Real World, Laguna Beach, The Hills. Like, I used to watch that kind of thing, but I have since kind of abandoned it, I suppose. But I definitely don't judge people for watching it. I'm like absolutely not one of those like snobby, pretentious people of like, oh, this is trash TV, whatever. Like, I watch all sorts of silly things. So it's just that kind of brand of show is just like not something that I gravitate towards. Do you like Ariana Grande? What's your favorite song from her? I like her music. I wouldn't say I'm like a mega fan, and I don't think I've listened to her enough to really be able to actually pick a favorite song. But I do have conflicted feelings about her just from the press tour and drama surrounding her co-star and her from the Wicked movies. But admittedly, I absolutely loved her portrayal of Glinda in the movie. Like, I remember going into it being very skeptical because I am a mega Wicked fan. Like, I've seen the stage show and I listened to that soundtrack religiously. And yeah, I have to give it up to her. She was absolutely amazing in that role. Not only was she so funny and really embodied the personality and the character so well, but she sounded incredible as well. So yeah, I would say that I am a casual fan of Ariana Grande, but yeah, do have conflicted feelings about her, I would say. What is your most controversial ship? I would say that the one that I feel the most strongly about that didn't end up being canon is Zuko and Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you've probably heard me talk about this to death, but that truly is the ship that I will, that's the hill I'm going to die on. And I would say that I just say it's not necessarily super controversial, just in the sense that I do feel like there is a large percentage of people who agree with me and are also a fan of that pairing, but I guess it does spark pretty heated debate. So I think that would be the definitive answer. But I have many ships that did not sail, unfortunately. Particularly, I also feel that way about Ichigo and Rukia from Bleach. I continue to be flabbergasted that they didn't end up together. And in general, I find that I end up falling into the second male lead syndrome, where I always end up rooting for, the second male lead in a series. Some that come to mind right now is Fruits Baskets, True Beauty, both of those, which I didn't even finish because I knew where the story was going. And then Gilmore Girls, although she had Rory had multiple, but she didn't end up with the male lead that I wanted her to end up with, or at least my favorite, I should say. And the movies, the film series To All the Boys I Loved Before. There's probably many more, but yeah, sadly, I just end up rooting for the wrong ones a lot of times. Oh, and I also want to mention ships that I feel like I just didn't agree with, but I don't know necessarily where I would place them otherwise. But with Naruto, I do not think that Sakura and Sasuke should have ended up together. I know it was sort of like the obvious choice because she had been pining over him for the entire series, but that's exactly the thing. I feel like it would have been a much more satisfying character arc for her, that the entire series is her pining over him, and then in the end she finally realizes her worth and she doesn't end up with him and she's better off with someone else, because she really does deserve someone better, because I don't think that Sasuke earned his place to be with her. And then I also feel like Naruto and Hinata was a very lazy pairing as well, because I felt like Hinata just pined over him for the series and he did not bat an eye towards her until the very, very end, and it just didn't feel earned in any way or satisfying. So yeah, I feel like with Naruto, the only ship that felt right or paid off was Shikamaru and Tamari. I loved that setup and that pairing. That one made the most sense to me. The rest of them, I was like, why are we doing this? But yeah. In the creator's defense, I do think I had heard that he admitted that he's not great at writing romance, so very valid that he understands that he isn't amazing at it. And for our last question, what K-pop moment lives in your head rent-free? There are so many good moments to choose from, but I think I have to go with Seonghwa performing Wonderland, particularly when he gets to slay down the Kraken. I do believe that they first did this iteration on Kingdom, and they have kept with it ever since whenever they do live performances, and it's absolutely incredible. I feel so blessed that I got to see it live when he had the glowing sword, and it's just so incredible. It's so dramatic and so fun and really says so much about the group as a concept, and it's iconic. So yeah, that's a moment that that lives rent-free in my mind. And yeah, that's going to be it from me today. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted your questions, and thank you so much for watching today's video. Just as a friendly reminder, if you sign up to my Patreon page during the month of April, you'll receive the artwork of this Sun Magical Girl that I worked on today as a postcard, and you can also sign up for the tier that includes the Sun sticker design as well, and the cost includes international shipping. And I also have over 50 exclusive videos over on Patreon, as well as wallpapers and extra behind the scenes photos, podcasts, and more. But of course, no pressure at all. I totally appreciate just any kind of engagement on this video and my channel. It really means the world to me that I get to be a full-time artist, and it's all thanks to you guys who support me in any way that you can. And I know that I covered many different topics today, but do feel free to let me know what you think about anything that I discussed in the comments down below. I love chatting with you guys about all the different things, and I hope you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!